Jinx is by far the best ADC to use to climb through low elo right now. If you saw my recent best blind pick ADCs video, then you know that I consider her tied with Ashe for top ADC blind pick ability rating, meaning you can take first pick and lock her in every game and obtain very good results even while constantly opening yourself up to counter picks. Her build variety right now gives her great choices for every scenario. Her now default build of Intel Wild Arrows is in an amazing state, and 14.23 nerfing Caitlyn means there really is no other DC the enemies can pick to match the power of Jinx on a consistent basis, making the optimal climbing strategy as an ADC in low elo right now very simple. Additionally, she's very fun and easy to pick up. Bear in mind that this is not a Jinx guide, rather it is a brief climbing guide where I'm going to give you advice on how to climb with Jinx in the current patch, which means the contents aren't going to be fully comprehensive on how to play Jinx, but will be very focused on tips for specifically the current patch, and not timeless Jinx advice. That sort of guide may come at a later date, but for now, this is my guide on how I recommend abusing Jinx for LP on patch 14.23. And just know that I am actually putting my money where my mouth is, since this strategy is exactly how I'm approaching my ranked games on both my Smurf and main account this patch, and it seems to be working quite well for me compared to when I play other picks. The reason why I think Jinx is such a good blind pick is that she works with and against almost anything. Though immobile, she brings a lot of self-peel and safety compared to other immobile ADCs, leaving her less vulnerable to engage. Her follow-up to engage from her own support is also decent, with the ability to combo her traps with CC, or follow up a long-range engage with a W snipe. She has DPS from her minigun to deal with tanks, and burst from her W and ult to deal with the squishies, and she can match the scaling of any enchanter pick that might stall out a lane. The only thing she somewhat struggles with in lane is dealing with mages whose abilities outrange her basic attacks, therefore neutralizing the advantage her range is supposed to give her, and abilities like Misfortune ult, which counter immobility due to being unable to quickly escape it without flashing. She's also supposed to be very weak into Twitch, traditionally her hardest counter on bot lane, but Twitch is very weak right now, making him not a concern. Unfortunately, mages are very unpopular in the ADC role, so we don't really have to worry about them either. We're going to start off this guide with a champ select game plan. It's quite simple. You should be first picking Jinx every game. Jinx is not a counter pick, nor is she easily counter pickable right now, so you should ideally be leaving later champ select picks to, in order of importance, your top laner, mid laner, and support. By blind picking an ADC that can't easily be punished on the current patch, it makes the rest of draft easier for your team without leaving you with any real consequences. Next, to optimize your results in draft, you'll want to be intentional with your bans. Although Jinx doesn't have harsh counters right now, she does have counters to an extent. The two most prominent in the current meta, meaning that they are both strong and popular right now, are Lux Support and Misfortune ADC, with Misfortune in particular having just been buffed in 14.23. They both have about the same pick rate right now, so it probably doesn't matter which one you ban, and there's some room for personal preference there. Personally though, I would recommend banning Lux, since Misfortune is more dependent on her support than Lux is on her ADC. Meaning many Misfortune counterpicks won't actually be that tough to deal with in comparison to Lux counterpicks, as they won't always be equipped with the right support to abuse you. Additionally, the higher you climb, the less popular Misfortune becomes in comparison to Lux anyway, so the further away you are from Bronze, the more likely you are to be countered by Lux than Misfortune anyway. In case you do have a duo who is willing to pick what you need, there are 3 supports I would recommend above all others for Jinx. When facing engage in lane, particularly from hook supports such as Blitzcrank or Nautilus, you'll want Braum, who can best survive an engage while blocking damage and blocking hooks for you. In passive matchups, such as against enchanters, you'll want Lulu, overall the best support for Jinx, as she'll provide the most scaling to help you take over the game. And finally, when facing poke, you'll ideally want Soraka, as she does the best job of keeping you healthy through poke lanes. Notable alternatives are also Thresh and Emilio. Thresh can replace Lulu against enchanters. He won't scale as well as Lulu, but he will help you force fights to snowball against them while keeping you very safe throughout the game with his lantern. And Emilio can be used as an alternative to Soraka against poke lanes, not packing quite nearly as much sustain, but still providing some, while providing a range of other benefits as well. Now we move on to the runes. For runes, you'll want to run Lethal Tempo, Presence of Mind, Legend Bloodline, and Cutdown. For secondary runes, you can run either Sorcery or Inspiration. Your Sorcery tree can be always just Absolute Focus and Gathering Storm, while your Inspiration tree should always use Magical Footwear, coupled with either Biscuit Delivery, Cosmic Insight, Jack of all Trades, or Triple Tonic. as to your personal preference. The sorcery tree should be your preferred option for scaling from the mid game onwards, while inspiration has the most impact in the early game. Both options are fine, but if you want my recommendation, I would say sorcery secondary is most likely to be optimal. Next we move on to items, the most important topic that we're going to discuss in this video because it's integral to fully taking advantage of Jinx's huge flexibility in the current patch. You could get decent results just spamming the Yuntal build every game with minimal variation, but that wouldn't take full advantage of how flexible Jinx's itemization is right now. So we're going to go in depth into the builds that I think are currently worth running, and the variations you should run depending on each game. And note that every time I talk about Lord Dominic's regards, you should mentally replace that with Mortal Reminder if that item is actually going to be more appropriate against the enemy comp. I just use Lord Dominic's to refer to the vague concept of your generic crit armor pen item. Our options for first item are Yuntal Wild Arrows, Collector, or Infinity Edge. Yuntal Wild Arrows is the strongest, best scaling, most ideal item for us to build, but suffers from a painful build path if you can't immediately base on a BF sword, and only maximizes its potential relative to the other items when you're able to free hit in fights, such as against frontline heavy comps. Infinity Edge Rush yields the second best scaling build path and doesn't rely as much on being able to constantly basic attack in order to maximize its efficiency, making it better against backline heavy comps, as well as having a pickaxe to fall back on first base if you can't afford the full BF sword. It's also a stronger first item power spike than Yuntal since it doesn't require its crit to be stacked up. That said, it still has to deal with getting a BF sword eventually, and is also by far the most expensive first item option, leading to a very delayed power spike. Collector has by far the best build path of all three item choices, also doesn't rely as much on being able to constantly basic attack to maximize its efficiency, and is almost as cheap as Yuntal. So where does that leave us? Well, for first item, if you can base on a BF sword on first base, you 100% want to take that BF sword, and go for either Yuntal or Infinity Edge. Most of the time you'll want Yuntal, but if the enemy comp is mostly ranged, and you don't actually expect to make much use of the attack speed, you may as well go for the Infinity Edge instead. If you don't base on a BF sword, you either still try to force Yuntal anyway if you think it's great against the enemy comp and you'll be able to make good use of its attack speed. Or alternatively, you rush Collector if you think that is not going to be the case. Sometimes you may also encounter comps that feel like kind of a middle ground, where Yuntal would be great against one or two of the champions, but wasted against the rest, in which case I would generally prioritize Yuntal only if I naturally based on a BF sword. Otherwise I would prioritize Collector, unless Yuntal still feels very efficient, such as their one or two frontliners are expected to be extremely tanky. When rushing Yuntal, your following build path should generally be either Runaan's Hurricane into Infinity Edge, or Infinity Edge into Runaan's Hurricane. I would say that's mostly personal preference, both are fine in almost all cases. Infinity Edge will be more damage to champions, Runaan's Hurricane will be more wave clear. Regardless, you almost always want your Zeal item to be Runaan's Hurricane when paired with Yuntal, since the additional bolts further reduce the cooldown of the Flurry passive to maximize its uptime. Lord Dominic's Regards would generally be built 4th, but can be built sooner at any point after Yuntal, if very much needed against heavy armor stackers. When rushing Collector, your following build path can depend on why you actually bought Collector. If you bought it because the enemy comp is backline heavy, you'll want to build Infinity Edge 2nd, then Rapid Fire Cannon 3rd. Rapid Fire Cannon is the key to still being able to play the game against comps with minimal frontline. Rather than finding yourself lacking any targets to DPS in fights, you'll use Fire Cannon to turn yourself into a poke machine. Fire Cannon, however, is quite bad before you have at least 75% crit, so you'll always want to precede it with at least 2 AD focused crit items before it, and it peaks at full build. The more damage the rest of your build is allowing you to deal in a single hit, the stronger Fire Cannon will be. This is the main reason why we would actively choose Collector over Yuntal if facing heavy backline comps where we know Fire Cannon will be needed. If we did Collector but don't actually need Fire Cannon, I would still do Infinity Edge 2nd to make your abilities hit as hard as possible, and then follow up with either Runaan's Hurricane or Lord Dominic's depending on your needs. Runaan's Hurricane can also be replaced with Phantom Dancer here if you prefer, since you don't need it for Yuntal's Flurry passive. When rushing Infinity Edge, you can do either Runaan's Hurricane or Phantom Dancer if just looking for DPS to deal with frontliners, but if we're facing heavy backline, you'll want to do either Collector or Lord Dominic's Regards into Rapid Fire Cannon. You could also consider just simply doing Rapid Fire Cannon's second item, since even if you only have 50% crit, you'll at least have a crit amplifier for the crit pokes you do land. But I would advise doing Collector or LDR first, since they will also give you a lot more damage on your W and ult, and in Collector's case will help you secure kills to scale faster. Whichever build path you go for, if you don't have Collector by your first 3 items, then 4th item you can either finish off with Collector still, since it's going to deal the most damage for you at that point, or instead opt for a Molotov Shield Bow if you feel survivability will give you better chances of winning by that point. So with all this said, you now have a wide variety of different build paths you can pursue depending on the enemy comp and how your early game is going, all specializing in different things. Especially important is identifying when you'll want to build a 3rd or 4th item Fire Cannon to deal with champions you otherwise would barely get to interact with. It would also work on a Yuntal build if you really decided you need Fire Cannon once you've already built Yuntal, and that'll do fine. But it's not as efficient since you'll have up to 55% attack speed contributing absolutely nothing to your Fire Cannon poke, which can potentially be a very large source of your damage during Fire Cannon games. So ideally, you should already identify Fire Cannon as your win con for a game before you even decide on your first item, so you can keep your items as synergistic as possible. And that marks the end of this video. To summarize, if you want to climb as ADC on patch 14.23, the best thing you can do is spam Jinx, always first pick her, always ban Lux or Misfortune, and adapt your flexible build to best suit your needs. Then watch as the enemy struggle to find picks that can punish the strong blind that is Jinx, while she also happens to be the strongest ADC of the patch. And enjoy as your team always gets the ability to counterpick or avoid being counterpicked as a result of your going out of your way to first pick every single game. One sad thing for this strategy is that one of her counters in Misfortune got buffed literally just this patch and is also quite strong right now, forcing us to choose between banning her or Lux, where otherwise it would be very simple to just ban Lux every game. But overall, since our biggest counter in the ADC role by far is Twitch, and Twitch is very weak right now, we're still getting off easy in terms of how hard it is for the enemy bot lane to punish a blind pick Jinx right now. The only way to punish a blind pick Jinx is to pick a mage bot lane, but the average player is just simply not willing to do that. Meaning right now, you're just statistically primed to climb if you just spam Jinx the way that I've just described. Good luck in your rank games. Please let me know if you found this video helpful and would like to see similar videos about strong bot lane climbing strategies on future patches and about future champions. And make sure to subscribe for more educational ADC content.